first time that I heard about Berry Farm was actually from my grandfather. He loved to tell me about DC history, and he would say, you know, this used to be this and that used to be that. And I was like, really, Grandpa? Because I don't see it. You know, he's telling me about Berry Farm, and I didn't understand what he was saying. I still didn't fully understand the successive levels of people living on that site and how you could have a place where freedmen used to live and a public housing project and, you know, civil rights activists and go-go music. Like it was a lot. And it made me think about telling the story and getting the story on record. If you're not on record, it's almost like you didn't exist.
The history of Washington, D.C. is one of community building and displacement. The cycles predate the city, the indigenous Powhatan of the Chesapeake, the Piscataway of Maryland, and along the eastern branch of the Potomac and into Anacostia, the Nacotchtank thrived in villages and towns prior to colonization. These shifts of place and displacement continue to this day with the breakneck pace of gentrification.
It's only a little over a year that we've been all displaced. When I heard that all over the country public housing was being taken away, I just couldn't believe it would happen to us. I miss my house. We used to hear that when we come out, music, people washing cars, talking trash. Now you just hear the demolition and homes being torn down. And you could just see all this land. This is like a lot of land. This is like a gold mine to the developers. Oh my goodness.
It was right here. Our house was right here.
Mm-hmm.
It was right here.
Oh yeah, it was right here.
My walkway. This is my walkway.
Yep. Oh wow, they done already tore down my mother's house.
Our house is gone, babe.
There's a 5-story building with a parking garage underneath. And the first floor will be concrete walls with like a CVS or a Walgreens, a grocery store, all that kind of stuff.
I lived here, so yeah, I hope it could be my grocery store.
It seems to me that the evolution of U.S. cities always happens on the back of black communities.
If people knew how amazing Berry Farms and Anacostia was back then, they would see a lot of stuff differently.
Berry Farm to me was like one big old grandma house.
It was called Berry Farms because in that whole area around there were the remnants of what were a whole series of farms. That whole area out there was bought by the federal government, you know, when they bought it from this man, Berry.
We know Berry Farm as a public housing project, but Berry Farm was indeed an actual plantation.
When the Civil War started, slavery was legal in Washington, D.C. It was as legal here as it was in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. And any place else in the country, there were slaves everywhere. They were being bought and sold within 3 or 4 blocks of the Capitol.
The original L'Enfant Plan of Washington, D.C., the boundaries to the north, including what we know as Florida Avenue now, that was Washington City. The diamond, specifically what we can think of as Washington, D.C., was considered Washington County, and it was more rural. The Berry that we know from Berry Farm, he had a farm that he cultivated on the other side of the Anacostia River. We have to understand the history of Berry and Berry Farm as a slave-owning planter in Washington, D.C. That's who he was, and his name is still on the land. Washington, D.C. emancipated enslaved people before the end of the Civil War. By the end of the 1860s, you have this kind of country land around the city that used to be worked by enslaved people. It's no longer being worked by the folks who toiled the land.
With the nation engulfed in civil war, Washington became a beacon for enslaved people. Many were arrested, and some returned to bondage. Yet the migration continued.